Hello, everyone, and welcome to the Q&A for A Colombian Family, as presented by the Philly Latino Film Festival. My name is Arzhang Zafar. I am one of the program directors at the Philly Asian American Film Festival, and I am here with, would you like to introduce yourself?
Sure, yeah. My name is Tanja Wol Sørensen, and I am a filmmaker and the director of the documentary film called A Colombian Family. I live in Denmark, but I'm originally from Korea.
Great. Yeah. So Tanja, just first and foremost, before we start, I wanted to just say I really loved this documentary, and I guess thank you for deciding to tell this story. Yeah, well, we don't need to give any context because I assume people who are watching this watched. So okay, so let's see. I do have some prepared questions. Just to start off with the basics, I guess. What led you to sort of, I guess, well, maybe talk a little bit about your background and how that led you to sort of decide to make this film, and then kind of what circumstances led to you actually being able to make the film.
Yeah, sure. So I have a master's in visual anthropology. So that's my educational background. I specialized in ethnographic filmmaking, which is, I guess, sort of the main sort of, interests or focus in ethnographic filmmaking is the sort of focus on everyday life and sort of just like following subjects over a long period of time, and also a lot of sort of discussions, or a lot of I guess having in mind a lot of ethical questions, and traditionally, I guess it was used very much in sort of like a colonialistic sort of method, but I think the sort of the later sort of ethnographic filmmaking has been very focused on critically, working with and working on and this sort of colonial background. So I originally went to Colombia in 2009 and 10 as a human rights observer in armed conflict areas, and I met Ruby. So the main character, I met Ruby. She was one of those sort of local human rights defenders, social leaders that the organization I worked for was accompanying on her travels to these different conflict areas, and for her to try and do her job in this very, very violent conflicts and very, very violent context, where she was being targeted and persecuted and threatened for the job that she was doing as a civilian human rights defender. And I think the reason why I became so I guess interested in Ruby was pretty much because we had a very sort of, from the get-go, we had a very sort of personal connection. We became friends, first of all, and I thought she was, apart from being this very, very amazing human being, there's also some parts of her that was she's just very, very vibrant. And I just think that what really fascinated me was this sort of this warmth and just very sort of happy attitude to a lot of things, despite the context that she was constantly working in, that could sort of grind even the strongest human being down. and that she was a female. She was like a middle-aged female in a very, very male and very masculine context. So I think after I spent a year working as a human rights observer, and then I went back to finish my studies. But I kept thinking about her, and we kept in contact. And she was also one of these people that continuously, you know, asks for international support, and so she's not, you know, a big, you know, she's not like a famous politician or anyone. She's just part of like these thousands of, you know, grassroots leaders in Colombia that you never hear about. And I just think that coming back to Europe and just seeing sort of the lack or distorted news that came out about Colombia, which was so different from, you know, the experiences that I had with, you know, people like Ruby, who showed me like firsthand what the reality was for a lot of civilians. So I just think I always had in mind is, you know, I really, really wanted to make something with her, but I didn't quite know in what way yet. So I went back to Colombia in 2013 as part of my field work for my master's thesis. And I immediately just contacted Ruby, and we met up, and she had all these ideas for what, you know, what my thesis should be about. And I just thought it was just so, I just thought, well, this is the way to do it, you know, listen to what she thinks is important. And then I just did practically, I just did my entire fieldwork about her and a couple of other female leaders that she sort of linked me to. And then I took the material back. So I filmed a lot of material, but I filmed mainly material that she sort of like collaborated on or actively participated in. And I brought it back, and I just started going through all the material and started thinking, well, there's something here, you know, there's definitely something that I think that for me, I would be comfortable making, and a story that would make sense for me to make. So I just slowly, over the course of 7 years, I continued to come back to Colombia. I got production funding from Denmark, and then I just spent the next 6 years filming her and her family.
Okay. Yeah,
that was a really long explanation.
Yeah. No, thank you. It's exactly what we were looking for, I think. Okay. So you kind of touched on or mentioned ethics a bit, and I was wondering, sort of given the kind of precarious nature of Ruby and her daughter's situation, how sort of, I mean, you kind of mentioned that it seemed like Ruby was always very open to being, you know, the subject of something like this, but sort of how did you navigate telling this story while sort of respecting the fact that, you know, these were people who were often like in danger, and the more public they were, the sort of more precarious things would get for them?
Yeah, so I think the interesting thing about a lot of human rights defenders in Colombia, and I don't know if it's particularly for Colombia or whether it's also the case for other contexts, but sort of my experience with Ruby and other human rights defenders in Colombia is that actually get the attention, especially international attention, is actually a way of is sort of like a shield to them. It's like the more international attention that they have, the sort of the more safe they feel, because there is these very, very sort of obscure mechanisms in the Colombian conflict, or the armed conflict, that then ended with the signing of the peace agreement, but then has continued now in a different sort of form and shape. But it has been over the course of, the more than 50 years that conflict lasted, that the Colombian government is sort of, it has one of the sort of most profound, constitutions in Latin America. It has signed all these different, human rights, conventions, and it's part of the UN and all these things. So it has sort of been very important for, the Colombian state of Colombian governments, different Colombian governments, to have, have a good rep, and to be respected, or to be part of an international community. But so a lot of the things that were going on within this internal conflict that gets very, very messy when you are sort of dealing with this sort of an internal enemy, as this, as the state has seen it. It gets really, really messy. And then what happens a lot of times is that, for example, human rights defenders, or union leaders, or student activists, and all these, civilians who go out and who are, being critical of the government, well, then, also some quite dirty mechanisms are in place to dealing with these kinds of people. So it's a reputation, or these are things that, I think that especially, the Colombian government doesn't want there to be any international focus on. So they have a tendency to act nicer when there are international people around. So, I mean, I for many reasons, I don't look like an average Colombian. I mean, I'm not a white European or a white, American, but I do have a Danish passport. So, part of that reason was I also could go with an internet. It's sort of like a golden passport in a way, when you have certain passports, and being able to go and show this kind of, solidarity in that way, or use, the privileges that you have. And also, I mean, I'm Asian, from Korea, but sort of being able to so obviously look different that, that, okay, this is an international person, this is someone who's not Colombian. So so I think when I came with this suggestion of making a film, she was very excited about it, because being this grassroots leader, going into conflict areas as her job, I think the idea of having me just tag along was actually, welcomed. So I think there's like a lot of people have asked this, like, but so, didn't it put her in danger? But I think she actually felt that it was the other way around. And I also, I had a press card. And so often it was also like, if we went into like, some of these sort of red zones that they were called during before the peace agreement was signed, often it was, I mean, I had a press card. I was press. I was international press. I was allowed to be there. So sometimes it actually did, it sort of was helped her a bit. And I also think that because there has been for so long such I guess very little or very one-sided news coming out of Colombia, sort of very sort of I guess sort of state version of things. I think that this idea, because when I started filming, it was still in the context of the armed conflict, and I think that the idea that through me she could be able to get her sort of reality out in international media, which was also I think a big thing for her, which was one of the reasons why she really wanted to participate in this with me. And I think also the fact that in Colombia has a history of having large spy networks, or large like informant networks, and being like an international person, that I left all the time. I brought the material out of the country with me, so there wasn't that fear of me being maybe part of some sort of network, or that the material could get into the wrong hands. Like there was just a lot of things that were a lot more safe, that because I came and left the way I did. So yeah, I think actually the sort of the whole process of it has actually been quite mutually like a good process for us.
Thank you. Yeah, super comprehensive. That makes a lot of sense. Okay, so I guess kind of shifting into the more filmmaking like stuff. Um, so to my mind, there's sort of almost multiple kind of narratives at play in this documentary, right? There's sort of the historical piece about the conflict and the sort of insurgency in Colombia, and then there's tying into that the history of this family and sort of the legacy of both Ruby and her late husband. And then at the same time, you sort of see this almost an intimate character study about this mother-daughter relationship as well, which is obviously all of those things play into each other, but there's sort of there's different things to kind of glean, I think. So I guess my question then is, how did you go about sort of structuring the film based on how you wanted it to the story to be read, and like how consciously did you craft a narrative, and how, or like was it more of a sort of natural thing that came about on its own?
I think that in the beginning, so I made a short film about Ruby in 2016, and that was just focused on Ruby, and sort of focused on her, I guess, sort of her daily life, being a human rights defender, living her life through through like, you know, armored glass and this whole situation of her living with armed, you know, armed protection. Um, and I think whilst I was making this short film, I realized that she had a daughter, and it wasn't something that I feel like the 3 years that I'd known her up until then, that I didn't know she had a daughter, and it was something that she kept really secret. And that, you know, she told me about her daughter, and that she was living in exile in Cuba. And I just, you know, I immediately, you know, I thought it was just so, it was just so human in a way, you know, like she can, there, you know, she can easily become, Ruby can easily become this sort of like, you know, extra, you know, extra resilient, you know, sort of like, you know, she's not like a normal human being. She's made out of a different material or something. But having this daughter and this sort of this motherly, the motherly sort of emotions that came out, which was something that I hadn't seen before. So for me, it was really this, it sort of clicked in a way, that this, you know, like, wow, there is actually like, there she is, it's just a human, it's just a human story, really. And I think that, you know, my sort of fear in a way, or not my fear, but like a lot of this, I'd thought a lot about this thing. Maybe there's a lot of people who won't be able to relate to this story, because she is so, you know, because they would see her as this like, okay, right, you know, this like female human rights defender who goes into armed conflict areas. And, you know, if you're not
A larger than life character.
yeah, larger, exactly. And if you're not specifically interested in Colombia, then maybe you wouldn't, you know, be interested, you wouldn't relate to it. But, you know, a family, like a mother-daughter relationship, it's so universal. And it's something that people who have no clue where, you know, what's going on in Colombia, or who doesn't know anything about, you know, who's never seen, you know, never heard anything, or is not interested in like war or conflict or anything, they would be able to see the sort of the beauty and the touching thing in this, in this mother-daughter story. And and then things just kind of happened a little bit, you know. She when we started sort of talking about it, I think she also, having kept it inside for so long, like having kept it secret for so long, or at least hidden, the fact that then it started becoming like a subject between us, and that really just kind of opened a lot of floodgates. And then I think that the story just kind of really came to me. um, and then we went to Cuba together a couple of times, and I think, meeting the daughter, and the first time I met her was I think it was in 13. And then I met this daughter, and at that time when I met her, she had so much anger. She had lived in Cuba since she was 18 on her own, away from her family, away from, she wasn't allowed to say who her parents were. And, at that time she'd been living there for 7 years, and, they don't have any money. So it was very, very hard for her to go see her mother. And she was just very, very frustrated, and she was very, very angry at a lot of things that happened in her childhood. And I think that I came, and that I knew her mother, and I knew all of, I knew everything that sort of had happened in their life. She also started using me a lot, like she saw also me as a sort of an opportunity to tell her side of the story. And in the beginning, I initially thought it would be Ruby's side of the story. But then I met the daughter, and I was like, wow, she's got something to say as well. She's really got something to say. And then I think from there on, like that's where the story sort of came to me, having these two sort of opposite poles in a way, who are also feeding off each other. And I think for me, I mean, me being a migrant myself, and having, having living in Denmark, coming from Korea, and like having this, I just saw it as like, there's so many people who can relate to this story of living in living apart, of being spread over because of war, because of economics, situations, because there's so many reasons that people move to different countries, not because of their own will. And so I thought, like, also like that in that moment, that's where I realized that like the connection to sort of me as a filmmaker, and what sort of story should I be telling with them, that was sort of like the connection that I found, was this sort of, being able to bring sort of my own thoughts and my own sort of perspective into it, which made sense, because in a way you can make 100 different stories. You can choose to focus on 100 different things, but where are you as you personally as a filmmaker? What story is it that you should be telling? And I think that was really the story that I, for me, was the one that made sense.
Sure. Yeah, that makes sense. Almost like trying to just tell a definitive or objective version of this would be a fool's errand, right? Like you have to, if you're there and you already have this relationship, you have to kind of do what you just said. Totally makes sense.
Yeah, and I also think like there are so many, I mean, I think in different contexts, the film's been shown in a lot of different festivals, and there's different reactions to, for example, there's that layer of historical context, and for many people, so if you show it in Europe, where a lot of people don't know what's going on, they, a lot of people have sort of asked for, well, why have you simplified the the context? Why have you simplified the conflict that layers so much? We were hoping to learn more about what happened in the conflict, and it's just such a complex context that there's no way you can do it justice in any way. I mean, and anyway, it's not, there's no sort of universal truth that you can tell about about a war. So I think, especially sort of, there's so many amazing Colombian filmmakers that make stories about, or films about the conflict, that can do it so much better than I can, like so I think for me, it was like, it was a decision that I specifically made to not to sort of to make it into as like this sort of like the shortest way of telling sort of like the most important points relating to this story, whereas because it's not my place either to like say like, oh, the the Colombian conflict was like this and this and this, but sort of invite people to say, like, after the film, if they liked it, then hopefully they'll go home and then they'll learn more about the conflict through the story of these of this mother and daughter. So I think that it's just not a war film.
Yeah, totally. So kind of speaking to what you were saying earlier about the sort of international reactions and whatnot. And correct me if I'm wrong, but I believe this will be the U.S. premiere of the film.
Yeah.
So I guess I would ask, what sort of, was there anything that sort of surprised you or was notable to you about how this film has been received, and like generally like with regards to the distribution or anything of note that you sort of ran into, and at the same time, sort of, do you have any expectations or hopes about how the film will be received here in the United States?
Yeah, so the film premiered, had its world premiere in at the CPH Docks here in Denmark, and then it went to Hot Docs in Toronto, and then it's sort of been at different festivals, mainly in Europe, and it's also been shown in Colombia, and I think that I've been generally surprised about how well people have received it, in terms of just people who wouldn't like normally be, I thought initially I thought, okay, it's mainly going to be you sort of like a Latin American interested audience that will see this film. But I've been very, very surprised at how well it's, just in general, also that people can see themselves in it, or people can relate to it, in Zurich, or in Paris, or in different places. But I think, so I mean, the people I've made it for, and I think also for, obviously, the people who feel it the most are sort of, and the people I've met so far, with the few screenings we've been able, like physical screenings we've been able to have because of COVID, have obviously been like exiled Colombians. And so I've screened it in Zurich, and I screened it in Paris at physical screenings before Europe shut down again over the winter, and it was really emotional screenings. Actually, it's sort of very, very emotional screenings, because I think, at least what the people told me, the Colombians that I met there, was that they'd never seen, like, because it's so silent, these lives are so silent, that it was so powerful for them to see it on a big screen, like, lives that they've lived, and then living in exile, or having been forced to leave the country, and then continue to live in this complete silenced reality of, like, they were persecuted, or their families have been killed, or and then, so all of a sudden seeing it on a big screen, I think that was made it all worth it for me, I think. But I think, I mean, obviously, I'm nervous. I'm super excited that it's going to be screened in the US now, but I'm nervous also, because it is the context of the United States and Colombia is also a very complex one. So there are many opposing views on it, and I think this film obviously takes a very specific sort of standpoint, from where the sort of the context is being viewed from. So I think that it's not trying to hide that at all, and I think that in that way, I'm excited. I'm nervous to sort of also see what the kind of different views or different comments or reactions to the film will be, because I mean, many people, obviously, and especially in the United States, because there's so many Colombians who live there, will have completely different experiences of what it has been to live in Colombia during the time of the armed conflict, and that will not be who will disagree completely in like sort of like, you know, the take on it that I have through Ruby and her daughter. But I think these are just very, very interesting conversations to have, also to be able to sort of make to sort of also start to have conversations about it, because I think there has been a lot of there's been a lot of silence also around all the things that that go on, have happened over so many years in Colombia. So I think, yeah, I think the time is right now to start talking about it.
Yeah, for sure. So is there, I guess, is there anything that has happened either in Colombia or with regards to these specific subjects since completion of the film that you would like people to know about?
Yeah, I mean, Colombia is a lot of things are happening in Colombia right now, and right at this moment, Colombians have been on the street in a national strike they're going into their 4th week now of blocking roads for, you know, in all of the major cities. There are still, you know, they're still out there demanding, you know, that there should be better treatments for, you know, more resources for the whole COVID situation. With a lot of, you know, they've managed to get the president, Ivan Duque, to withdraw the tax reform and now also the health reform, because they were very, very, they like this whole sort of reform package that his government has proposed are very sort of very neoliberal and sort of very very unequal. And I think that it's not new. I mean, these are strikes that started in 2019. So they've been, for almost like a year and a half, it's been brewing for a long time, this discontent in the Colombian population. And I think it's so historical what's happening right now, because it's like it's the general public. It's like students, it's young people from the cities, it's middle class people, it's you know, it's so many people who are out on the streets now and who are really like they've had enough. And I think the historical thing about it is that this violence that I think people have seen, and this repression coming from the government towards these people on the streets now in the big cities, this is violence and repression that I think that has happened for so many years with people, you know, in the countryside, but that hasn't really affected so many people in the cities. But then it's arrived in the cities now, and I think it's like I hope, or I think that it is a turning point for a lot of things in Colombia right now. And I think it's really, really important that like international society like continues to follow what's going on and puts pressure on you know, on the governments, because I think the sort of the violent response that it's had, I think officially is 46 dead now, and most of them are young people. So I think it's what's going on is really, really it's not just important for Colombia. I think it's important for everybody to follow what's going on there.
Absolutely. And of course, I think hopefully your film will go some way to getting people to look at that and not look away as much.
Yeah.
Okay, so I guess starting to wrap up then, what's next for you, if anything, or if as a filmmaker or as a human rights observer, or whatever you're doing?
Yeah, I think, well, I am researching for a new film. I'm researching for 2 new films, so I'm hopefully I will be able to get started once, you know, once things calm down a little bit regarding COVID. I'm hoping to I'm hoping to make a film sort of also in the sort of same theme. I think it's kind of like sort of, you know, what I'm also interested in as a filmmaker is these, you know, intimate relationship sort of stories. And so my hope is to be able to go to Korea and also make sort of a generational story from sort of more from my sort of own personal perspectives. And yeah, and then I'm researching, hopefully, to be able to go and follow the elections in Colombia, which are in May next year. So yeah, those are two really interesting things that I hope will be able to happen.
Yeah, absolutely. And I sure can speak for everyone watching this that we hope to see them come to fruition as well. Great. So thank you so much, Tanja, for speaking with us. Thank you to the Philly Latino Film Festival for hosting you and in screening your film. I will just really quickly plug the Philly Asian American Film Festival, which will take place November 4th through the 14th of this year. So check that out if you're watching. Yeah, and obviously, and thanks again. This has been great. Super enlightening and fulfilling conversation. Thanks.
Thank you.